In the first session, we talked about the first premise. We talked about why miracles are possible. Now, this is one of the premises of the main argument. I've laid out the argument for you in the first session. If Jesus is risen from the dead, it depends on the four premises. And we're going to defend each of the four premises. The first premise was, are miracles possible? And we said, yes, it is. Now we're going to talk about the historical reliability of the New Testament documents. Now, as I already said, we are looking at the New Testament documents not as a divinely inspired word of God, so to speak. Of course, we as Christians believe that the Bible, the entire Bible, is the divinely inspired word of God, but we're going to look at the New Testament as historians would look at it. Not as a divine book, but as a collection of documents that are either historical or legendary, things like that. So as from a historical critical perspective, we are looking at the New Testament, and basically we're going to say that the New Testament is a credible source for the life of Jesus. Because the arguments that we make for the facts concerning the resurrection of Jesus, we are taking it from the Bible, right? Now, I'm not using the word scripture because it entails divine inspiration, but we're looking at the New Testament. Although as Christians we believe it's the inspired word of God, the focus here is to look at it as a historical document and subject it to historical critical scrutiny. All right, so that's the purpose of it. Now, why only New Testament, right? Why not the Old Testament? Primarily because we're looking at the life of Jesus, the information that we can get about Jesus, and you look at that particular, you look at it from that perspective, the New Testament is in question because it contains biographies of the person of Jesus Christ, and it contains commentaries, explanations about the person of Jesus Christ, in the other books like Paul's letters, so on and so forth. All right. So, is the New Testament historically reliable? Now, of course, this is a huge topic. I can speak about it, for days and days together. In fact, I teach Christian apologetics at Lakeview. This is a semester-long subject, and for the credibility of the New Testament itself, I would spend about a month. All right. So it's a big topic, and so I would just give you a few reasons why I believe the New Testament is a reliable historical record for the person of Jesus Christ. Okay, so why do I believe it's historically reliable? For four reasons. Because the New Testament, firstly, the evidence is so early that it cannot be legendary. The information contained in the New Testament is so early that it cannot be a fabricated document, or it cannot be a legendary documents that we see there. Okay. Secondly, the New Testament seems like it does not contain any lies or fiction. Now, all of these are historical critical methods that scholars use to determine any historical document, not necessarily the Bible. Scholars, they look for answers to these four questions. Are those documents early? Does the document contain lies or fiction? Is there any kind of fiction or legendary development that we see there in those documents in question? Thirdly, we will look at some of the corroborating evidence when it comes to the information that we find in the New Testament. Do we find corroborating evidence from sources outside of the text itself? So if you're looking at the Bible, do we have corroborating evidence from archaeology, from geography, from history, or any other source for that matter? Right? So if at all there are corroborating evidences for a given historical document, then it is considered to be reliable. All right. So we'll look at the third point, and then finally, also we will look at whether those documents in question will have confirmation from non-Christian sources. So if it is a Christian source, do you have any information that will be confirmed by non-Christian writers or historians? So all of these are some, in fact there are more, but I've listed only some tests that historians use in order to determine the authenticity of a particular document. Now we're going to look at the New Testament and subject it to those historical tests. Now obviously, these are big questions. Okay, so I will very quickly go through the first two, and I will little elaborately go through the third and the fourth historical test. Now, are the New Testament documents early? They are absolutely early, when you're talking about the ancient context, right? Now, we certainly know that all the books of the New Testament was written well before the end of the first century itself. Right? And particularly if you're focused on the life and events of Jesus Christ, the information that you find in the New Testament is between, from 2 years since his resurrection until 40 years. So between that period, you will see the information that we have, which means the amount of information we have for its early documentation is huge. So within 40 years, all the information we have about the Bible, about Jesus, is recorded in the Gospels and in the Acts and Paul's letters, right? Or the information they use for their explanation comes from sources that are very, 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 very early. Now you may wonder, 40 years is too long, right, for the documentation of events. But you compare it to ancient context, you will see that the New Testament is, far, far, far it outstrips, competing explanations. Now, just to give you an idea, we all know, about the greatness of Alexander the Great, right? Now, how certain are we that Alexander the Great is a historical person? Now, you get into any history department of any recognized university, they will talk about Alexander the Great as though everything they're saying is a historical fact. Now, I'm not saying he is not a historical person. Now, I want you to think about how early are the evidences for Alexander the Great when compared to the New Testament documents. The first written source for Alexander the Great comes 400 years after the life of Alexander, written by historians Arrian and Plutarch. They wrote the life and legacy of Alexander, historical life of Alexander 400 years after Alexander the Great lived and died. So he was he is believed to have passed away in 323 BC. But then Plutarch writes in the 2nd century, the beginning of the 2nd century AD. So it's about 400 years later, you have the first written document about the history of Alexander and his conquests. But you look at the life of Jesus, is believed to have died sometime between AD 30 and AD 33, but the information about him is no later than AD 70. All the information we have about him, right, the documents are less than 40 years from the time of his death and life. So you see the information is so early, you will get to appreciate how early the New Testament documents are only when you compare it with the other documents. Now if you are so certain about the life of Alexander, think about another great historical person by the name of Julius Caesar. Again the same problem. More than 250 to 300 years later, you have the first written document about Julius Caesar. He's supposed to be the founder of the imperial Rome, right? And we teach the life of Julius Caesar and the conquest of Julius Caesar, specifically in his Gallic wars. We talk about the life of Alexander the Great, and we talk about it as though it is a historical fact, but then we stand up on both our feet to question the credibility of the New Testament, when those documents are far, 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 far earlier than these documents from the event it took place. All right, so they are very early. Of course, there are so many other reasons I can give, but because of time, I'll have to quickly move on. right? Now, does the New Testament contain fictions or lies? Of course, there are so many layers of tests we can add on to those questions. Like, for example, historians use the test of embarrassment, enemy testimony. They use do we have multiple independent eyewitnesses for all those things. So there are several ways in which you can answer that question. We'll just quickly tell you just one about the enemy testimony. Right? Enemy testimony is a very, very powerful testimony in order to determine whether a particular fact in question is true or not. Right? The reason why historians like the enemy testimony so much is because it always works. Right? Any court of law, in order to determine whether someone is saying the truth or not, this enemy testimony is very, very important. Now, for example, if my mother tells you that I am a brave person, how likely it is? How likely is it to be true? Very likely. Because all mothers will say, my son or my daughter is the most beautiful person in the world. They're the bravest and the strongest person. But what if you had a person in your life that is hell-bent on killing you? If he stands in front of a court and says, this guy is a beast, this guy is so brave, how likely is it to be true? Most likely, right? And historians, specifically in forensic cases, where something has happened in the past and you're trying to determine whether something is true or not, whether that fact is true or not, use this enemy testimony to determine whether something is a lie or not. And when you look at the New Testament, and when enemy attestation is applied to the New Testament, it seems that the New Testament comes out superior. Now, there are so many examples I can give. Let me just give you one. Now, we see in the scripture, I forgot the reference, I think it's in two Gospels, that Jesus will call Peter Satan. Right? Oh, sorry, this is an example from embarrassment. I'll give you an example from enemy testimony. The example that I will again use it later on, I think it's in Matthew. I'm not talking about that passage. I'm talking about another one where I think it's in Matthew 28. It's talking about the Jews who will basically be saying that the disciples have come and stolen the body of Jesus. Right? Now, what does that mean? Now, when you say, when the Jews who are enemies of Jesus, because they are the main reason why Jesus is killed, right? When they come and say that the body of Jesus was stolen, what does that imply? It implies that the tomb is empty. Right? Now, it's a very important historical fact. We will be talking about the empty tomb, which is one of the main evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Now, you have the enemies of Christians who admit implicitly that the tomb was empty. Now, how likely is it to be true? Since it's coming from an enemy's mouth, it is highly likely that the tomb was empty. Because the explanation for the resurrection of Jesus, the Jews said that Jesus did not rise from the dead. That is not the right answer. They said that the disciples stole the body and they lied about his resurrection. Now, the reason why they say disciples stole the body is because the body is not there in the tomb, which highlights the fact that the tomb is empty. So, whether the tomb was empty or not, based on enemy testimony, we can conclude that the tomb was empty. So, enemy testimony is a powerful method to determine whether a given historical document is telling the truth or not. Now, there are so many other things, whether there are contradictions. If there are contradictions, it cannot be true and things like that. But let's not get into that. I would like to get into point number 3 and point number 4. Do we have corroborating evidence for the New Testament when we're talking about its credibility? Now, there are so many, archaeological, geographical, and historical corroborations that we see here in place. Now, I'm going to very quickly run through, of course, this presentation will be made available to you. I just want you to pick the argument alone. the basic point is to say there is so much of archaeological evidence, historical evidence, and geographical confirmation from sources outside the Bible. Right? We're talking about confirmation of New Testament documents. This confirmation is coming from archaeology, from historical sources outside of the documents in question. Okay, we're going to look at the book of Luke first. We're going to see how true or how reliable the book of Luke is. Right? Now, Luke names 11 historically confirmed leaders in the first 3 chapters in his gospel. Just the first 3 chapters in his gospel, there are 11 historically confirmed people. Okay? Now, I will briefly also talk to you about why this is very important. Now, you look at the 11 names. Sorry, it is so small. Herod the Great, Caesar Augustus, Quirinius, Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate, Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, Trachonitis, Licinius, Annas, and Caiaphas the chief priest. You have 11 people whom the New Testament documents that are corroborated by historical, those are all non-Christian historical sources. Now, I want you to look at the next one. Okay? Now, I'm just holding one point for now. I will mention that point a little later. But just think about this: 11 historically confirmed people, based on sources outside of the book of Luke. Okay? Outside of the New Testament. Now, I want one person to read Luke chapter 3, verses from 1 to 3. The person that reads will get. Yes, Luke 3, 1 to 3. Hungry people?
In the 15th year
Yes.
of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip Tetrarch of Iturea, and Trachonitis and Licinius Tetrarch of Abilene, given the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. He went into all the country around the Jordan, preaching the baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins.
Okay, now you've read this passage. Sorry, brother. You've read this passage. Now, if you are writing a story, think about a story is like a fictional story. Think about the things that you would include. Now, imagine Luke is writing this as a fiction. Look at the amount of information he's using. In the 15th year, so he's locating the time, in the reign of Tiberius Caesar, that is in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, who's a historically confirmed person, right? When Pontius Pilate was a governor. Okay, now I'll stop for now. Now, how will you start a fictional story? If you are writing a fictional story, what is the first sentence you will use? Yes. Who said? Lots of people said, so I cannot give it for everyone. You will start once upon a time. The moment you see once upon a time, it's fictional. A lot of the times we watch movies like this and we take, what is that? Yes, long ago. Yes. So it is fictional. You see a sentence like that, mostly kids' storybooks, it is fictional. You see here, see the amount of information Luke is giving. Now, historians look at this and say, this is straight history. Since also you have corroboration from other sources. See the amount of information. He's giving the time, he's giving the location, and most importantly, he's mentioning names. Have you thought about it? Who are these people? Are they Christians? Okay, even if they are non-Christians, what is their attitude towards Christianity? Hostile attitude. Now you want to include people who are having hostile attitude towards Christians in your writings. How important is it for you to be accurate? Imagine you're writing, okay, let's put it into context. Okay, it's going online, let's not get into national issues. But let's say, you're writing about me and I'm not your friend. You write something about me. Do you think you will get away with writing stuff that is bad about me, which is untrue? Do you think you'll get away with it? No way. Now these people are leaders. Now you write something mentioning all these people. All these people, Tiberius Caesar, who's Tiberius Caesar? He's a Roman emperor. Okay? You talk about a false fact mentioning the name of Tiberius Caesar, what will happen to you? Be gone. Yes. So you see so much of information, so much of historical people mentioned in only these 3 verses. Now, things like these, there are so much I can tell you, but things like these points to the fact that these are really historical. Now, this is not, a conservative Bible teacher who is saying this. It is non-Christian historians concluding the fact that because of these things, Luke is a credible historian. Right? Let me just talk about some, scholars. Now, F.F. Bruce is a Christian, a Bible scholar. Okay, that basically this is a point he's making. It's very important for you to follow. He's saying a writer who thus relates his story to the wider context of world history is courting trouble if he is not careful. Because if he gives misinformation or false information, he's gone. Okay, he affords his critical readers so many opportunities for testing his accuracy. Luke takes this risk and stands the test admirably. F.F. Bruce, a scholar. Now, Sir William Ramsay, he's an atheist, archaeologist. Okay, he's not a Christian. Okay, now listen to what he's saying about the book of Luke. Luke's history is unsurpassed in respect of its trustworthiness, and Luke is an historian of the first rank. He should be placed along with the very greatest of historians. This is Sir William Ramsay, is a British archaeologist. We will, of course, he gets into detail about researching the book of Acts too. We will talk about that in a minute. Now you look at the book of Acts. Now, of course, you look at Luke. Even non-Christian skeptical scholars believe it's historically accurate because of the things that are mentioned there. Now, you look at the book of Luke. We have this wonderful scholar called Colin Hemmer. Now, I've just taken a portion of his research. Hemmer identifies the third point, 84 facts. Okay, 84 facts in the last 16 chapter of the book of Acts, and all those 84 facts have been confirmed by historical and archaeological research. Just the last 16 chapters, 84 facts, and I've taken the time to list all the 84 facts. Okay, we're not going to look into any of these. I will make it available to you. Okay, 84 historical facts, and these facts, include things like weather conditions, the port where it was located, how deep the waters were, right? The language, the cultural factors, all those were accurate, right? When you compare it with when you try to corroborate with outside sources, it is so accurate. 84 facts in the book of Luke. Roman historian A.N. Sherwin White says this: for Acts, or the book of Acts, confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject its basic historicity must now appear absurd. Roman historians have long taken it for granted that the book of Luke, the book of Acts, is historically credible. Again, Sir William Ramsay, he's an atheist. Right? Now listen to what he's saying. I began with a mind unfavorable to it. Right? What does that mean? This is the integrity of scholarship, right? A lot of the times you get into some research, you fix in your mind that you will have to prove something, right? But when the data shows something else, you will twist your arm to somehow falsely write what you have not researched, right? Or even in your research, when you find later that what you have researched earlier was wrong, you don't try to change it sometimes, right? But Sir William Ramsay was not like that. He began with the attitude of trying to disprove the book of Acts. Listen to what he says he found. It did not lie then in my line of life to investigate the subject minutely, but more recently I found myself often brought back into contact with the book of Acts as an authority for topography. He's saying the book of Acts is an authoritative source. If you want to study ancient topography, the book of Acts is a credible source. Antiquities and the Society of Asia Minor. If you want to study about topography, if you want to study about antiquities, if you want to study about the Society of Asia Minor, the source you'll have to go to is the book of Acts. It's coming from an atheist. It was gradually borne in upon me that it has various details and narratives showed marvelous truth. So basically the book of Acts, Sir William Ramsay is saying, is a matter of truth. All right. So you have confirmation from archaeological sources. Now I can go on for all the books of the Bible. In fact, all the Gospels. Right. But I think I've made the point very clear that we have corroborating evidence for the New Testament documents from archaeology, from history, and from geography. All right. We just saw the book of Luke and Acts. Luke Acts is authored by the same person. And so I just want to make sure that you understand the credibility of the book of Luke and Acts. Okay, and we can do again, Craig Blomberg is a wonderful scholar who have researched the book of John and found so many, I think 59, historical facts that have been corroborated by archaeology, history and geography on the truth of the book of John. All right. Likewise, you can go for each books. Right. So scholars in general agree that the New Testament documents are more or less historically true. Where they disagree are the theological implications for the biography of Jesus. There they disagree. But when it comes to history, we have majority of the scholars conservative, secular, hostile, any kind of scholars you take, the majority of the scholars agree that the New Testament documents are historically reliable. Now let's look at some of the non-Christian evidence we have for the New Testament. So here's the New Testament figures that are cited by non-Christian writers. Okay, we're not taking this information from the Bible. The people that are listed on the left, the list is not taken from the Bible. It is taken from non-Christian writers who have confirmed the life of these people, the things that they did, the people that are mentioned in the New Testament. Okay, for Jesus you have so many evidences. Agrippa the first, Agrippa the second, Ananias. Okay, so the list goes on. So these are all historical figures mentioned in the New Testament, but it is also mentioned in historical records outside of the New Testament. And now these writers are not favorable to Christians. They are not Christians. They are not followers of Christ. They are non-Christians. Now, and if you carefully notice, everything that is written in the Bible, just imagine you don't have the Bible at all. Okay. Jesus died, rose again from the dead. The early church did not record the Bible. Let's say the disciples have not written the Bible. You can still find out more information about the life, the teachings, the death, the burial of Jesus Christ from all these non-Christian writers. You don't need the Bible to know the basic life history of Jesus and the history of the early church. You can know all of those things only from you can even know it from hostile sources. That's why even if the Bible is not available to us, you can, find the contents of the New Testament available in the non-Christian sources. And non-Christian evidence is a very strong evidence when it comes to can we trust the New Testament documents. Because what historians are looking at is corroboration. We see corroboration from archaeology, from history, from geography, but now we see corroboration from non-Christians. Non-Christian corroboration is a strong evidence for the historical reliability of the New Testament. So what we have seen here, of course, there's so much I can talk about. The bottom line is to say that the New Testament documents are credible sources for the life of Jesus Christ, because it is corroborated by archaeology, history and geography, and non-Christian sources. To top it off, again, the evidence for the New Testament documents to be early is so much. It is written, those documents are very early. It cannot be legendary. All right. So so all of this you can read it by yourself. The basic point is to say that the New Testament documents, I'm not going to read this, but Dr. Clark Pinnock also makes this point that that we have strong historical reasons to believe that the New Testament is highly reliable. So I think we very quickly moved through to the preliminary considerations. We've looked at the first premise: are miracles possible? The answer is yes. Now, is the New Testament historically reliable? The answer is yes. We've looked at evidence from non-Christian sources. We've looked at evidence from archaeology also. Now, you may not have the time to process it right now, but if you want to process it later on, please process those those information. Will be a lot more helpful to you as well. Now let's move to the meat of the argument. The evidence for the resurrection, the facts concerning the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There are 5 facts that historians, I wouldn't say all, but the majority of historians, majority of critical scholars, now I'm not talking about only Christians scholars, I'm talking about scholars around the spectrum, whether they are Christians or atheists or secularists or whoever they are. The majority of the scholars agree upon these 5 facts. Right? What are those facts? The first fact is concerning the death of Jesus Christ. The first fact concerning the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the historical fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. Now, literally, in fact, in this point, literally all the scholars, 99.9% of the scholars agree to this, that Jesus died by crucifixion. Of course, we have scholars like Richard Carrier and few others who deny even the existence of Jesus, which is very absurd. Right? We do have, but the 99.9% of scholars, critical scholars, agree that Jesus died by crucifixion. That's fact number 1. Okay. Now, how do we establish this fact? The reasons why scholars believe that Jesus died by crucifixion is a historical fact is this. I'm going to list 5 reasons for why scholars believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. Firstly, the death of Jesus, right? It is attested by multiple independent biblical sources. Remember, I already made this point very clear that the biblical sources are historical sources. We're not talking about the Bible as the inspired word of God. We're talking about the Bible as historical documents which are found to be reliable. And you see here the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the information that they get about the death of Jesus is coming from a common source that existed before the writing of the Gospel of Mark. Now, scholars believe that Mark is the first Gospel. And the source that all of these 4 people are using, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, in writing about the life of the death and burial of Jesus Christ, comes from this common source that existed before the Gospel of Mark. Now, scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark was written in the early 60s. And this source is perhaps in the 50s. Right? The source that they're using, that is, we call the pre-Markan source, is from the 50s. Now you see that the writing, the source that they're using for their Gospels is in the 50s. Now let's say Jesus died in between 30 to 33. What's the time gap? Less than 20, like about 20 years, 20 to 25 years. And scholars believe the reason why this material is true is because 25 years is too short for legendary additions or embellishments to take place. You cannot embellish a historical document in less than 25 years. Now in India we have this famous problem of rewriting history, right? You cannot rewrite history when the time gap is about just less than 25 years from the event of that happening. The time is too short for legendary developments to take place. Scholars say that you will need at least 2 or 3 generations to pass before legendary developments take place on a historical fact. Now, of course, it was shocking for me to read some historical, even published articles on the Holocaust. There are people who deny the Holocaust. Have you ever thought about it? I never thought such people existed. That the historical fact of the Holocaust, in fact, according to them, is a myth. It never took place. But you see here we have, let's say 1940s to now, how much? It's about like 70 to 80 years now has gone by. You see people, trying to come up with an embellished version of the Holocaust, right? But scholars say 25 years, it is not possible. Now, why do you think you cannot embellish or you cannot, add a myth to a fact in less than 25 years' time? Not even one generation has passed. So what does that mean? Not even one sorry. What does that mean? It means that the witnesses were present, alive. Let's say I said something. Okay? Let's say I said something. And if what I said can be corroborated by the already living witnesses, what will happen to what I said? It will easily die off. The witnesses were alive. And so you cannot create a story in 25 years' time. And in fact, that is exactly what the Apostle Paul said when he stood in front of Governor Festus. What did he say? He said, do you think, I'm lying about the resurrection of Jesus? Go and talk to people. There are people around. There are eyewitnesses. You can go and verify it yourself. People who have, with their physical eyes, have seen the resurrection of Jesus. Go and, inquire about them. And so the point is, when the eyewitnesses are alive, you cannot cook up a story. And so you see this pre-Markan source, it is too early for fabrication. Likewise, Paul. Paul's writings are even earlier. Some of the books, Galatians, Romans, Galatians, Philippians, Ephesians, earlier than the Gospels. They are earlier than the Gospels, which makes it, much more compelling. So these scholars, for these reasons, they believe that the information about the death of Jesus is so early that it cannot be legendary. Likewise, the book of Acts. Of course, if the Gospels pass, the book of Acts also pass, because they're authored by Luke, right? And Luke, every scholar agrees, is a historian of a first rank, right? There's no issue with the credibility of Luke's history. So accurate. Even, it is so interesting that, scholars of antiquity, right? They get their information from the Bible. They use the Bible as a historical source to draw information. And a lot of the, non-Christian historical facts that they, try to conclude, find their support in the Bible. And it is so confusing for me when they try to when they try to, demean the credibility of the Bible while trying to use the Bible to prove some of the historical points for their, research. It is to that extent. It's so easy for people to, demean the credibility of the Bible when the evidence for the Bible is far more stronger than any historical person of antiquity. Okay, so the biblical sources have strong, we have, early biblical source for the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. We also have non-Christian sources for the death of Jesus Christ, okay? Disturbing me a lot. Okay, so as I said, we have non-Christian sources that attest to the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. I'm very quickly going to mention a few. Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, on 2 occasions in his Jewish Antiquities, talks about the death of Jesus. Okay, we're not going to read it, just note the name, Josephus. Okay, he is a Jewish historian. Likewise, we have Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian, attesting to the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. Right? Now, these are all hostile sources. They're not Christians. They're all hostile sources. And all of them, the evidence is documented, their writings. Okay, you find it in the respective references that I've given to you. We find it in Greek sources. Firstly, I mentioned Jewish source, Roman source, now a Greek source, Lucian of Samosata, who was a Greek satirist, talking about the crucified, Jew. Then we have the Jewish Talmud, right, from Babylon. In the Sanhedrin 43a, we see the Jewish, Talmud talking about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. Now, all of these people are not favorable to Christians, and yet we have so many non-Christian sources for the death of Jesus Christ. Now, I said we have biblical sources that talk about the death of Jesus. We have non-Christian source that talks about Jesus, but we should also think in practical terms, right? Whether a person who has gone through such a thing as Jesus would somehow survive, right? Now, I just want to take you through the sequence of events that happened, until the death of Jesus, to help us understand that, Jesus Christ certainly died on the cross. Okay? So, basically the point is to say, medically speaking, Jesus could never have survived the crucifixion. The crucifixion was so brutal that there is no chance for him to escape death. Okay? So let's look at the sequence of events. Okay? Now please follow me on this. What happened first? We're talking about the time since he was, captured by the Roman authorities, right? He was captured by the Roman authorities, and then he stood in front of the Jewish Sanhedrin, right? And they condemned him to, Pontius Pilate. Then, Pontius Pilate again, hands him over to the Roman executioners to flog him, right? And then after his flogging, he was asked to carry his cross, go to Golgotha, and there he was crucified. Okay? So, just a summary of it. Okay? Firstly, he was flogged. Then he carried his cross to Golgotha. He was whipped along the way. Then he was nailed to the cross. Then he was hanging on the cross. And finally, there was a spear that was pierced to his side. These are the things that happened to Jesus. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, let's not get too medical. But for a person with common sense, do you think a person who has gone through this would survive?
There was claims, like suing claims.
Yes, we will talk about it.
Against this, no?
Yes, we will talk about it. It's an important question to ask. Can a person survive this? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more in detail. What happened first? He was flogged with crown of thorns. Okay, now the flogging that the Romans do is very vicious, right? They use a whip called the flagrum whip. It has about 3 to 12 strands of leather ropes. Okay, and on that leather stranded ropes you have metal balls, you have nails made out of the bones of animals, you have sharp iron pieces, right, that are integrated with the whip. Then you have hooks, right, that are taken from animal bones. You have shards, you have pottery shards, you have glass pieces, all attached to this whip. Now, what was the reason that they do this? The reason why they, create this whip for people who are under capital punishment is so that their flesh is ripped apart as they, beat the body. So with one strike, what happens is all the sharp parts of the whip, it just rips your flesh from your body, until your flesh is exposed, even your bones. In fact, this process is called the half death. That is what the Romans used to name it. They called it half death because, in the crucifixion process, half of the people die, in flogging itself. Right? On top of it, you had a 3-inch thorn, a crown of thorns on top of your head. Right? And I think the book of Isaiah and the book of Psalms talk about this very beautifully. The book of Isaiah says that when it's the Isaiah, I think 54 or 53, when he's talking about the suffering servant, right? It says that he was beaten to such an extent that the bones were seen. right? So when will your bones be seen when you're injured? It means your flesh is totally ripped apart. That is what the flogging would do, right? And Psalms 22, when it talks about the crucifixion, it talks about how the face of this suffering servant is so marred and deformed that you could not even make out who this person was. Just have that picture in front of your eyes. The face of Jesus completely ripped apart, right? He was beaten to such an extent that his flesh was totally out and his bones were exposed. That is the extent to which he was flogged. Now, Jewish flogging means that you have 40 lashes of whip, but Romans had no count. So we are not sure as to how many lashes Jesus received. So the first point is he was flogged. Okay. Now after flogging, he then carries, like scholars believe, about 30 to 40 kg wood on top of the mountain from the platearium, what they call the place of making the decision where he was flogged, until Golgotha, where he was supposed to be crucified. Scholars say roughly between 600 meters to 2.5 kilometers. It is not a hiking that he was going on. He was climbing a mountain. That mountain, we all, even if you go to Israel today, you will find out, that it is not a cakewalk. Imagine a person whose bones are exposed, right? Whose face is discovered, flesh is ripped apart, is carrying a 30 kg wooden piece. That way it is not a smooth wooden cross, right? He's carrying a 30 kg wooden cross, climbing, to the top of the hill. The reason I'm telling this is you must try to think whether such a person could ever be alive. Right? This is just the second process. Then the third process, he is nailed. Right? Typically, we think that he was nailed, in his palms. That is not where he was nailed. He was nailed on the wrist, because that is how your body can support the hanging. Right? It was nailed into the wrist. And this nailing is also quite crucial, because scholars say you nail it right underneath your wrist, where the two bones merge, right? So that your body, the body weight can be supported. But not only that, there you find a nerve called the medial nerve, which is responsible for all the. Remember when you try to walk past some wall and your bone, your elbow hits the funny part, right? You get that tingling sensation, right? The nerve that is responsible for the tingling sensation is what passes right through there. And so, even if you slightly, hit any object that passes through that nerve, it will pain for a while. Imagine a 5 to 7 inch nail, being, sent across the medial nerve between his wrists. Likewise on his feet too. Now all of these are very important as I make the case for the resurrection. All right. Thirdly, he was nailed to the cross. Fourthly, he was hanging on the cross. So you have to think about a person who was flogged, who carried his cross, who was nailed. Such a person is hanging on the cross. Now when you hang on a cross, right, with your with nails on both your hands and feet, you must understand what will happen to your breathing. Now there are two steps in breathing. One is you inhale and then you exhale. Every time you inhale, you will have to put effort or pressure on both your legs and hands, so that you somehow bring in some little bit of air into your lungs so that you can breathe. Now imagine a person whose flesh is ripped apart, broken, right, with his face disfigured, head is bleeding, body is bleeding, with all of this problem, how long do you think a person can hang? Right? Now, you can even test it. Now I tried to test it because I used to go to a gym earlier. I stopped it 1 month back again, but that happens. But you try to do pull-ups, right? How many of you do pull-ups? You do, many do. Now in your healthy state, keep hanging. How long can you hang? 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? let's say you are very, what do you call, you are like a calisthenic coach or something. Let's say you can hang for like 10 minutes. That's all. You cannot do more than that. Now, how long did Jesus hang? Scholars say in 20 minutes you will die by asphyxiation is the technical term they use. Basically, the point that you will not be able to inhale air into your lungs. Thereby, over a period of time, you'll, for lack of breath, you will die. Okay? And so Jesus was hanging on the cross, and finally, a spear that is, speared into the side of his body, which scholars believe will destroy the heart and the lungs that is before the heart as they pierce the side. So for all of this, right, this is what Jesus went through. Now, do you think that a rational person would come to the conclusion that somehow Jesus could have, lived through this process? Right? Common sense would say, no way, no way. Now, it is not only common sense people, even medical practitioners. And there is one quotation that I've taken from the Journal of American Medical Association that says that clearly the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right rib probably perforated not only the right lung but also the pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death. Accordingly, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. It says, according to modern medical knowledge, there is no way a person who's gone through this much would have lived to see the next day. Jesus certainly died. We have medical reasons, we have historical reasons, we have literary reasons to believe Jesus died. An atheist, critical New Testament scholar, Gerd Ludemann, says, Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan, he was probably the greatest Jesus critic of this century. This is what he says, that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Bart Ehrman, the leading New Testament textual critic today, says one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. So we have, New Testament scholars who are not Christians. All these are atheists, staunch atheists. What's that?
They are critics.
Yes, they are critics. They themselves agree to this fact. Now the main point is we should be able to explain this fact. Okay, we will get to all the 5 facts and we'll see which hypothesis best explains the fact. The second fact, first fact is Jesus died by crucifixion. Okay, Jesus died by crucifixion. The second point is regarding the burial of Jesus. Now what is this fact that most scholars agree? It is that after his crucifixion, right, crucifixion is a fact, but after his crucifixion, scholars believe that Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. They think this is a historical fact. Now, on what basis do scholars think that the burial of Jesus is a historical fact? Based on the following reasons. Firstly, the burial of Jesus is supported by the early creed that we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, all of the scholars believe that this writing by the Apostle Paul is historical, and it is as early as 2 to 3 years from the crucifixion itself. And so scholars believe this can never be legendary. It cannot be a concocted, fabricated story because it is very, very, very early. And since it is early, scholars believe that this fact shows that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. Now, what does it say? Okay, now one person can read it.
For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried.
Stop. That he was buried. That is very important for the historical historian. The historian wants to know whether the information about burial is available in this text, because all scholars agree 1 Corinthians is written by Paul and it is earlier than 60 AD. And this information is a lot more earlier. Okay, enough. I think we can stop. Catch it. Okay, so this is the evidence. The second, I think we talked about the pre-Markan source that that the apostles used to write the gospel. In that source also you will find the burial narrative. Okay, so these are all biblical sources for the burial narrative. Now it's important that the name is crucial. Joseph of Arimathea, right? He is a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. Historically speaking, scholars believe that Jesus was buried in his tomb, primarily for the reason that firstly it is reported by the Apostle Paul, secondly by the pre-Markan source that all these gospel writers are using. Now all of these sources are very, very early, a lot before 60 AD. And the 1 Corinthians passage is a creed that is taken from the early Christians. Those days Christians do not they were not literate and they did not have the New Testament document with them, the early Christians. And so what they did was they memorized certain facts about Jesus Christ as creeds. Even today, a lot of the times in churches we recite the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Constantinopolitan Creed, right? In such forms, truths were memorized orally and transmitted. And so the creed that you find in 1 Corinthians 15 is a part of the oral tradition that was passed on since the resurrection of Jesus. And likewise, this pre-Markan source, the source that Mark used in writing his gospel, right, is also agreed to be historically credible, and thereby making it an early document. And so the burial of Jesus by Joseph of Arimathea is a fact. Now one more reason why the burial narrative is believed by most scholars is because again it has enemy attestation. Remember I talked about the enemy attestation? Very important for historians. Now why do they do that? Because they say that a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin buried Jesus in his tomb. Now what is the Jewish Sanhedrin? What is a Jewish Sanhedrin? What do you mean by Sanhedrin? It's basically a court, right? A Jewish court that sentences Jesus to death. Now, Joseph of Arimathea is a member of that, court. Now, what is the relationship between that court and Jesus? Are they favorable? Do they like each other? Are they friends? No way. Now, if you want to cook up a story about the burial of Jesus, what would you say? Would you include a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin who mocked Jesus, who made Jesus go through such a horrible torture? You will never invent a story that has a member of a Jewish Sanhedrin to perform the burial rites of Jesus. You will not make him a hero. You will not make a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin a hero, the court that sentenced Jesus to death. You will not do it. And yet if it is done, what does that mean? It means it is true. Remember, enemy attestation, very powerful. Historians, when corroborating evidence is present, enemy attestation is very important for them to believe the fact. And also, finally, the reason why the burial narrative is, favorably accepted by most scholars is because there are no competing burial narratives at all. We don't have any historical source that talks about the burial of Jesus in a different way. All the sources we know, Christian, non-Christian, any source which mentions the burial of Jesus, basically says that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. Since we don't have any competing alternative hypothesis on this, we can safely conclude that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. That's why scholars believe this fact. John Robinson from Cambridge University says, the burial of Jesus in the tomb is one of the earliest and best attested facts about Jesus. So, we've got two facts in place. Fact number one, what is the fact number one? The death of Jesus. Jesus died by crucifixion is a historical fact. Fact number two, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. 2 facts. Okay, we're going to move on to fact number 3, but I want to take a very, very quick breather for you guys. Some of you are stretching, so I would like Jwala to come up on stage, and she's got some activity for you. So, very short activity. We'll just quickly go through, so you can also relax and cool your mind first round. Yes.
I have it. So, if you see him, do you remember anything at the first hint? A man who strong saved the children of Israel.
Motherland.
Oh my goodness. Whom should I? I'll come and go down with you. Okay, I'll count because 12 questions are there. Each question I cannot give. I'll count who is doing it. He did known for his reverence to God. He was a relative of a queen. Yeah, and he is. Oh my God, clap! And the next one, character 2. Can we guess is it a lady or a man we are doing? Sure. Okay, she. It's about a woman.
Mary.
Okay, she was a bearer of. Okay, she was present when the early church met for prayer. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
You can give you can give those things. You can give. Oh, you already have it.
I got the prizes.
Okay.
I just count how many are doing. And next, character 3. Any?
Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron. Jethro. Moses.
Yes. Who someone from the Aaron? Huh? Aaron. Moses and Aaron, the brothers.
Jethro.
Okay, let's do the big two. Is that
Jethro.
right? Yes. I think I heard from Anand sir and he's Jethro. The next character 4.
David.
Yeah, actually,
He did the book of
so did we lost it. Character 5. Any guesses seeing him?
David.
So whoever wears it, okay, let's go. He had a heart, he listened to his servants.
Naaman.
I think we should give him these answers everything. And yes, he is the
Naaman.
most famous. And I'm very bad with names, so I don't know what do you call him?
Naaman.
In Telugu it's Naimanu and in English it's Naaman.
Naaman.
Naaman, yes, okay. It's
Korah.
a very good. Oh my God.
There are-
Okay, you guys are very active. Yeah, this man questioned Moses' leadership and yes, he was involved in raising a rebellion. And yeah, you got the answer. Yes, Korah.
Joseph.
Who said that? Okay. Wow. Yeah, it is. Yeah. The next character, right? Can you guess? Yeah. I don't need to give any hints at all. Yeah, it's Hannah. Yeah. You can see the priest and the women. Yeah, Hannah. I think first. Wow, yes, it is Enoch. Within the first I was keep on thinking how should we find out the best building. Okay. Enoch. I know.
Zacchaeus.
It's my favorite character because I am short, so I feel it's me. Yeah. He was shorter than anyone. He showed his yes. Zacchaeus, right? Clap for me.
David and Jonathan.
Jonathan.
David and Jonathan.
Really? Why can't it be Abraham and his friend? Why not?
Yeah, David. Jonathan is a
It is Jonathan. Yes. And the final one?
This man was a follower of Jesus. He was from Philip.
Yes. Yes, I think I have to give you brother. And the second prize.
Okay, so fact number 3, on the Sunday following his crucifixion, okay, so we know for a fact that he died by crucifixion, he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. Now on the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty. Okay. Scholars believe that this is a historical fact. The tomb of Jesus was found empty by some of his women followers. Okay, and I think I've briefly alluded to this morning an enemy testimony about the empty tomb. Okay, that is one of the reasons why scholars believe in the empty tomb. Now again, the reason why scholars believe for this to be a fact, again it is being used by the same source that talks about the burial of Jesus that was available for Mark to write his gospel. Is one of the reasons for why the empty tomb is believed to be a fact. And also the Corinthian passage that we talked about, that scholars believe it to be historical and not later than 2 to 3 years from the resurrection of Jesus. That is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Basically when these are creedal formulations, you use the fact that the creed says Jesus was buried and then was raised, indicates, according to the Jewish beliefs, that if someone is buried and raised, then automatically it means that the tomb was empty. Now why do they believe it? The Jews believe in physical resurrection, right? They don't believe in spiritual resurrection. That is, when the final day comes, the resurrection will be a physical one. So if the resurrection is a physical one, it leaves the tomb empty. Okay, so when you have formulations like these, from a Jewish perspective, you use phrases like he was buried and he was raised. Those phrase, you call it phraseology or whatever it is. When you use phrases like that, it means, according to the Jews, that the tomb was empty. That is what they meant when you're talking about the resurrection. The Jews also believed in the resurrection, but they believed in a resurrection that will take place at the end of history, not in the middle of history. In fact, that is one point that I'll be talking about in a few minutes from now. And another important reason why scholars believe that the tomb was really empty is because the witness for the empty tomb were women. Now that is very critical, because in any Jewish court of law, and even Roman, particularly Jewish, women's testimony was not even taken into consideration. Right? If there was an incident that took place and the only witnesses were women, they were not counted as credible witnesses at all. In fact, the Jewish historian Josephus, whom we have talked about quite often now, he says that the testimony of women was regarded as so worthless that it could not even be admitted into a Jewish court of law. Any later legendary story, now this is important, any later legendary story would certainly have made male disciples discover the empty tomb. The tomb was empty. Who brought the good news first? It was the women, right? The women were the first to bring the good news. Not only were they first, they were also the only brave ones. What were the men doing? They were hiding behind their doors, closed doors. It was the women who dared to go in the morning to find out what happened to their dear friend, right? The fact that it was female witnesses that is mentioned in this particular passage in the New Testament means that what is being said is true. If you are writing a story, if you want to create a fictional story about the resurrection of Jesus, you would never include a female witness. You would only include male witnesses, because female witnesses were not counted as credible witnesses. I don't know for what reason, but they were not counted as credible witnesses. So this fact leads scholars to conclude that the empty tomb is historical. And also I think the point about the enemy attestation that I talked about earlier, that is the fact that in Matthew 28:15, it's an interesting Jewish allegation. Once the Christians started to preach the resurrection of Jesus, the message that the Jews said is not is not that they agree with the disciples, but they said that you have stolen the body of Jesus. That's an important theory which we'll talk about after lunch. But the point here is that the very fact that they said the body was stolen means that the tomb was empty, because they knew that there was no one in the tomb. So this empty tomb is coming from, it is implied by enemies of Christianity, and therefore scholars believe it to be true. All right? So this is, fact number 3, that Jesus's tomb was found empty by his women followers. So fact number 1 is that Jesus died by crucifixion. Fact number 2, he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. Fact number 3 is that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was empty. Okay, we'll quickly go through fact number 4 too. Since I have 2 more minutes, I'll quickly go. Now again, the fact number 4 is his resurrection appearances. That following the death of Jesus, this is what scholars believe. After the death of Jesus, Jesus appeared to various people in multiple occasions and under various circumstances. That is, people claimed to have seen the resurrection appearances of Jesus. Now, this is not to say that yes, he resurrected, but it is to say that people claim, specifically the disciples claim, that Jesus appeared to them. That is, they saw some form of Jesus. And now this, scholars believe, is a fact, because we'll talk about the reasons for why they believe in this fact. So the resurrection appearances of Jesus happened to people after his death. Okay? Now why do they believe this? Again, the passage that is most famously considered early and historical, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now all critical scholars agree to this. Right? In fact, when I say all, the majority, you'll have only a few people who will disagree, but the majority of scholars believe 1 Corinthians 15 to be a creedal formula that that originated in in 2 years or less than 2 years of the resurrection. Okay. Now, since it is present, in 1 Corinthians 15, you have a list of of people to whom Jesus appeared. Right? We don't have the time to read the passage. Now, if you read 1 Corinthians 15, you will see that first he appeared to this person, then he appeared to the 12, then he appeared to the 500, then he appeared to James, and then, so on and so forth. So this list, since it is found in this passage, and this passage is found to be, historically credible by scholars, they believe that the resurrection appearances of Jesus, at least the alleged resurrection appearances of Jesus, is historically true. We are not trying to say at this point in time that yes, Jesus rose from the dead, but it is to say that people had the resurrection of Jesus, that is the post-mortem appearance of Jesus in front of them. Okay, the explanation for that, we will get to that after lunch. And not only that, you have multiple independent attestation of the appearance. Now, in any court of law, multiple independent witness is very important. It's actually a earmark for truth, or earmark for historical fact. So it is like they'll see whether 2 people are saying the same thing, right? Now if 2 or 3 people are accused to be in a group that conspired to rob a bank, right? Now, when the court of law investigates each people, they will do it separately, and they will see whether the information shared by this person is corroborating with the information shared by the other person. When the information they share, when the fact they share is corroborating, they most likely will say it is true. Most of the information that is corroborating is true. If it does not corroborate, it is false. Likewise, you see here, you will see the Gospels corroborating Acts, and even within the Gospels, right? The appearance to Peter, for example, it is independently attested by Luke, right? The appearance to the 12 disciples, it is attested by both Luke and John. And you also have independent witnesses to the Galilean appearance, to, when Jesus appeared in the Mount of Galilee, right? It is found, attested independently by Mark, Matthew, and John. Right? And you see the appearance to the women, mentioned in Matthew and John. So you see, the corroborating information from different multiple sources, and scholars say when you have multiple independent attestation, it is most likely true. And finally, to the appearance of James. Now, James is an interesting person. Now, when James was alive, he did not believe in Jesus, right? Because James was a half brother of Jesus. The Bible says that Jesus' family members did not believe in him, right? To be, the Son of God, to be the Messiah. Now, that is understandable, right? Now, how many of you have brothers here? Okay, those of you who have brothers, right? If your brother comes and tells you he is God, how would you respond? Perhaps the way James did, right? Say, Poda, you think you are God, right? That too, our brothers can never be God, right? Someone else can be God, but brother, no way, right? And that is why scholars believe the fact about James is very crucial to them. Because while Jesus was alive, his family members did not believe in him. That includes James. Right? Now in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, Jesus, after his death, appeared to James. Now we know from sources outside the Bible, specifically from Josephus tells us that James was the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And also that James was killed by, unfairly by the Jewish court. Now, which means that James is martyred, right? He gives his life for Christ. Now, what happens to James? When Jesus was alive, he didn't believe in him. And later he becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and then he dies as a martyr. Now, what convinced James? What do you think convinced James? What do you think, convinced James that his brother was God in flesh? The appearance that is mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, right? Specifically says, I think that verse beautifully says, and then after he appears to the 12, and then he appears to James. And that convinced James. The resurrection of Jesus, the resurrection appearance of Jesus convinced James that his brother was truly God. Right? Imagine, your brother being God, that too, the God of the creator of the entire universe, right? Maybe I don't know what must have gone through his mind, regretting, every conversation he had with Jesus while he was alive, right? But later we see James was convinced that Jesus, rose from the dead because of the appearance. Okay, so we'll stop for now. We've seen 4 facts. Fact number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Fact number 2, he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. Fact number 3, the tomb in which Jesus was buried was empty. And fact number 4 is that the followers of Jesus had appearances of Jesus after his death. We have one more fact, and then we will go to the explanations for these facts. I totally understand. We will be having one small activity in 10 minutes. So, shall we begin? Okay, so very quickly I will reiterate what I've been saying all along. I will go through the argument once again, and we'll continue from there on. So basically I said that the argument for the resurrection of Jesus involves 4 premises which will then logically lead to a conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead. The 4 premises are that miracles are possible, and that the New Testament documents are historically reliable, and then the 3rd premise is that Jesus was buried by Joseph of, premise number 3 is that the facts concerning Jesus' resurrection is true, and then finally the the hypothesis that Jesus rose from the dead is true. So if these 4 premises are true, then the conclusion logically follows, that is, Jesus rose from the dead. So we are done with premise 1, premise 2, we're actually at premise 3. We're looking at the facts for the resurrection. And in the facts for the resurrection, we looked at 4 facts. We have one more fact to go through. The 4 facts we've looked at are that Jesus died by crucifixion, and then the second fact is that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. The third fact is that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was found empty by some of his women followers. And fact number 4 is that after the death of Jesus Christ, he appeared to many people, to individuals, to groups of people under different circumstances. So these are the 4 facts we looked at. We will look at one more fact, and then we will get into the explanation for those facts. So the 5th fact is regarding the origin of the Christian faith. Now you look at the disciples. The original disciples, they believed that Jesus was risen from the dead despite their having every predisposition to the other. That is, they didn't have any reason whatsoever to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. So despite all their predisposition to not believe in the resurrection, they ended up believing in the resurrection. Now we're looking at them as Jews. All right. Now the reason why scholars think this is an important fact concerning the resurrection is that the disciples of Jesus, right, their belief system drastically changed overnight. From a place of being dejected, afraid, they began to believe in this new message. Although Jesus has been constantly telling them about his death and resurrection, the way in which they approached and their theology did not comprehend the resurrection of Jesus. So why do scholars think that the original disciples believed in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary? Is because of the following reasons. Firstly, as a Jew, you would not believe in a dying Messiah. The Jews had the concept of Messiah, but not a dying Messiah. Now, if Jesus was truly the Messiah, he would never have gone through the crucifixion. He would not have died. Because for the Jews, redemption or salvation, what it was to be called Messiah, was sort of political redemption, political salvation. They were looking for a Messiah who will redeem them from the Romans, from every political power. That was the sort of Messiah that they were looking forward to. Now you have Jesus, who his followers claimed to be the Messiah, is dead. So even the disciples, the original disciples, never had this concept of a dying Messiah. Although it was spoken to them, although it was like Jesus through his parables talked about it, the original disciples did not think that the Messiah would die. They were looking for a Messiah who would save them from their political oppression. And that is why you would see a lot of zealot movements. They thought Jesus was a zealot who was looking for a political freedom. All right. So a dying Messiah, the concept of a dying Messiah was not in the picture for the original disciples, and yet they believed in the resurrection. And so their belief system constantly changed, shifted from one side to the other. So the scholars think that this fact that the disciples believed in the resurrection despite having every reason to believe in the contrary, the scholars think that this is a true fact. Secondly, if you look at Jesus, he died a terrible death, right? Now, who would die a terrible death according to the Jews? A person who is cursed by God. And that is exactly what the original disciples thought, that once the crucifixion happened, that everything was gone. Right? That is why you would see the disciples of Jesus, after the crucifixion, they just went back to their places. Right? They were filled with fear. They thought that the Jesus movement was over. Right? And some even went back to do their original profession, like fishing or whatever it was. Right? So Jesus' death as a criminal, because according to the Jews, those who die hanging on a tree or those who are crucified are criminals. And no way a Messiah would be crucified. Crucifixion is basically the message of a loss. That is, the message of Jesus Christ is a defeated one. That was the message that the crucifixion showed. And yet, despite the tragedy of the crucifixion, the disciples came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. So, they did not believe in the concept of a dying and a rising Messiah. They did not believe in the idea that the Messiah would be crucified like a criminal. Because the Bible again says in Deuteronomy 21 that only those who are cursed by God will be found hanging on a tree. And yet when Jesus went through this and came out and having appeared to them, they believed that Jesus rose from the dead. And finally, there's also the point about the resurrection in the middle of history. Now, I think I've mentioned this earlier, that the Jews had the concept of the resurrection from the dead. But the resurrection from the dead will happen only in the end of history, not in the middle of history. They believe that all human beings will rise from the dead. They will either, be eternally damned, or they will be eternally in the presence of God. They had that concept. But the judgment, and a judgment after which the eternal life will come, comes only at the end of history, not in the middle of history. So the resurrection of the dead, comes at the history's end, not in the middle of history. So when Jesus rises from the dead in the middle, Jewish theology does not allow for the belief that some human being rose from the dead. And yet the disciples believed in the resurrection of Jesus. So scholars believe that for all these reasons, that the fact that disciples believed in Jesus Christ despite having every predisposition to the contrary, scholars believe that this could be a huge fact. Now we've looked at 5 facts. Okay. Now the question is, I forgot to mention the New Testament scholar N.T. Wright basically saying, for this reason, as a historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. So basically, the 5 facts for Dr. N.T. Wright is to say that the only logical conclusion should be, if the tomb is empty, if Jesus died, if the tomb is empty, and then if he appeared to people and the disciples' faith drastically changed overnight, the only logical explanation could be that Jesus rose from the dead. But scholars use various other historical tests to determine whether the facts are true or not. So we're going to look at some of the historical tests or some of the main reasons why historians will believe in some sort of historical fact. Is one of the testing methods used by Professor McCullough. He's a famous historian who came up with some of the tests that historians use to determine whether a given historical event is actually a fact. Okay, so firstly, when there are facts that you need to explain, right, those facts should correspond, or should the theory that you come up with, the explanation that you come up for the explanation of all these facts must have explanatory scope. That means for the facts, you need to have an explanatory scope. And so you look at the resurrection hypothesis. The fact that God raised Jesus from the dead could explain the empty tomb. Why is the tomb empty? Because Jesus rose from the dead, right? And then it also explains why the disciples saw some form of the resurrected Jesus. They saw the appearance of Jesus. The resurrection hypothesis shows that the reason why they saw the appearance is because Jesus rose from the dead. And also, if you look at the drastic change in the belief system of the disciples, points to the fact that they actually met the resurrected Lord. So the resurrection hypothesis, is successful when it comes to having a good explanatory scope. It also has explanatory power because it explains the death of resurrection, the death of Jesus, the burial of Jesus, the empty tomb of Jesus, the appearances of Jesus. It also explains about the birth of the early church. So the resurrection hypothesis has got strong explanatory power. Not only does it have explanatory scope, it also has explanatory power. And also, plausibility is another huge test that historians used in order to determine the best explanation of the facts. Now, why is this plausible? Again, as I said, it is not any Tom, Dick and Harry who rose up from the dead. It is a person in history who claimed to be God. His lives matched his preaching. So it is in context that the resurrection of Jesus is plausible. Right? So Jesus made claims to be divine. He performed the deeds of a divine person. And as he prophesied, as he proclaimed, he rose from the grave on the third day. So we are looking at an explanation which is plausible given the context. And also when you look at the degree of ad hocness, whenever there is a historical fact that has some ad hoc information, scholars usually reject. So the minimum ad hocness in a particular theory is more likely to be true. And in fact, in the case for the resurrection of Jesus, the only assumption we will have to make is the fact that God exists. Now that's the only assumption we make when we come into this argument. But again, as we know, there are very good reasons to believe in the existence of God. So the ad hocness also disappears once God comes into the picture. So overall, you see, the resurrection of Jesus makes total sense given the 5 facts. We looked at 5 facts. The explanation that that satisfactorily explains all these 5 facts are the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, now we've looked at the 5 facts. Now you will have lots of theories that argue otherwise. They will say that these 5 facts can be explained by other theories too. So we will look at alternative hypotheses, alternative theories that will explain away the resurrection in this particular section. So before we go to this section, we'll quickly have that activity so that you will again be reactivated into the final session. All right. So yes, last activity and then we'll go to the final session.